So you asked me, beyond the theater. And so what happened is that in 1977, I had suffered a personal loss, tremendous loss. And so my actors came, three of my actors came, and they said, come on, get your clothes back on. And we need you to work with us. And so I developed a piece set on them, except that they set it on me. Because there were three very different actors, and to find a way to create a world that contained them. And we found that world. And so this piece was different from all the other work that we had done before. And in a sense, it was a really breakthrough piece. And to this day, I recognize that I failed at the time to recognize what it was. I did not sufficiently value it, but I continued to work. And the following 2 seasons, I worked on 2 different projects, and neither of them saw the light of day. And I understood that phase of my creative life was over. That was finished. But what is a very happy part of the story is that I had started to work on something. In 1977, I found an article, just a filler really, in the San Francisco Chronicle, and it told the story of a Brazilian. Actually, I think he was a barber, and he had suffered a catastrophic facial accident. And over a 17-year period, because he was denied medical care or Social Security, he basically had no recourse but to work on his own face. And over that 17-year period, 17 years, he decided that he would operate, and he performed I don't know how many procedures on his own face in a favela, a slum in Rio de Janeiro, without one single instance of infection. This is already remarkable. And I saw that article, and it just took my breath away. And I was working on this particular piece that I told you about, the breakthrough piece. So I didn't really have time to consider it beyond sticking it on my bulletin board where it would never migrate, because otherwise it would migrate. And I thought, some years, some great writer will find this story and create an amazing novel about this. I didn't even have time to think about what it was about on the deep level. And the second year went by. I still knew where the clip was, but nobody had done a brilliant novel. And the third year, well, that's a story. My godmother was dying, and she was very much afraid that she would outlive her money, the little money she had. She'd been a school teacher, and female school teachers were paid half of what men school teachers were paid in those days. And she had a pension that was growing 3% a year through TIAA-CREF. And so she was very frightened, and I thought, I am going to have to support this woman. And I had trouble supporting myself at the time, and I thought, okay, what can you do? Well, the thing to do is to write an extraordinary novel. It will sell 1 million copies, and you will be able to support your godmother and see her through until she dies. Well, that's how my first novel came into being, and it is called Face, and it's a fictionalized account of a man who suffers a catastrophic facial accident and what that might mean and on the deepest level. Has to do, of course, with the way human beings see one another and whether or not they accept one another. So we're dealing here with questions of identity, with questions of race, with questions of class as well. And this novel, my agent said to me, well, it's going to win many prizes. I said, what? Prizes? In fact, when I brought it to Viking, they said to me, well, where have you crawled out? From what woodwork have you emerged? Where have you been? You're in your 50s. And I said, well, yes, I was a theater maker. I had a company. And so they said, well, who's going to blurb this book? Who are your friends? Friends? I said, well, I don't have any friends. I mean, I don't know writers. This is all new. So my agent said, yes, well, it's going to win many prizes. And you know what? Oh, she was right. It won a whole bunch of prizes. And that sort of beginner's luck goes to your head. Yeah, I sold this book in a week. Most writers have a terrible struggle. But in any case, I was not written out. I took a breath. of air because I had a colleague who was traveling to Asia, and I had always wanted to travel to Asia. I had never had the money or the wits, but I thought with a little support, I won't have to go alone the first time. I will go. And I saw in Indonesia, in Java, in Yogyakarta, outside of Yogyakarta, is an extraordinary temple, stupa, shrine, if you like. It's all those things, called Borobudur. And I knew I would see it, but I had no idea that it would write me, and it invited me. And I was writing text already on the plane, because with the first novel, I had a tremendous difficulty knowing how to resolve it. How does it end? Well, how does it end? Well, in FACE, I called it ending material. I generated about 16 pages of ending material. And so that was not going to happen again. So I wanted the next project would have a beginning and an end. So on the airplane, I wrote some text. It turns out I had written the beginning and the end. Of course, I didn't realize it at the time. One doesn't, the way I work, I don't know what I'm doing at first. I just do it. I work intuitively. And scientists would never approve of this method. But the way it works is that when I'm really composing, when I'm in the heat of composition, I wake up at 4 a.m. and I don't get out of bed. I noodle. And noodling is a very important part of the process because that's when the best ideas come, the free associations and the impossible transitions. So in this book I'm describing to you now, which is centered in a protagonist is a carver who carves the panels of the life of the Buddha in the first gallery in Borobudur. And I had a problem because in the middle of the story, he was going to go from India, where he learned his craft and where he was an apprentice, and where, by the way, they had unions and guilds. They had Social Security. They had widows' pensions. So the guild took care of the widows and the orphans. They had extremely elaborate financial structure. So they could, for example, borrow money. They could loan money. And they could establish an endowment in perpetuity for the maintenance of their temples and so forth. So I knew we would go from that civilization to Chopo, which is what Java was called in those days, Chopo. And that he would be traded like, baseball players are traded now from one dynasty to another dynasty. Here, have my interior decorator. He doesn't cost much, and so forth. And essentially, they were slaves, of course. They didn't think of themselves as slaves. They thought they were the golden boys of the carving business, but in fact, they were indentured. They were slaves. And so I had the transition, and I was not going to put him on a lengthy ocean voyage from South India to Chopo. So I had a dream, and I woke up laughing because in the dream, I had seen waves. And I had joked with the waves, and I said to the waves, "Who is going to transport me?" And there they were. They were transporting me. So the transitional point in that novel, it's just one small section, is essentially that. It's the waves that transport him, and there he is. All of a sudden, he's in Chopo, just like that. So that was the second work, and basically that work came because I was not written out after FACE. There was so much still, and I wanted to encounter our days of making theater. I wanted to address the grief that I felt making theater in a culture which allocates in those days 10 cents per capita of the national budget every year to making art and to supporting art, which in my view is perhaps the only language that really unites all human beings who speak any language, because it is a commonly held language. The art of music, the art of the archetype, everyone speaks that language. So there were tremendous frustrations and anguish over those 12 years that I had the company. And that novel is where I put it all. It was about the grief of what it is to live a creative life, to live the life of an artist. And yet, in that grief, there's tremendous triumph because you basically have created something absolutely extraordinary. So that was the second one. And then
And the title of that book?
that is FRIEZE, FRIEZE. It's the architectural word for freeze, but it's a pun because already then I was very interested in things nuclear. And at that time we had the nuclear freeze. And so it is a pun because it alludes remotely to the whole business of what is happening to this planet in terms of radiation, in terms of nuclear energy.
Well, what I see as a consistent theme in not only the work in the theater, but also in your writing, it's about the human condition and how we not only cope with that, but how we can rise above it.
How we can affirm
and how
it.
we can affirm it in a way that is nourishing.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So after that came The Love Queen of the Amazon. Okay, and that was the one really potentially commercial novel, and your viewers would delight in reading it because it's all about sex. It's all about sex, and it's about money. But it is all sex and money are metaphors, okay, for politics because it takes place in a whorehouse. And the reason it takes place in a whorehouse is that it's a whole disquisition on hemispheric politics, both the northern political style of the northern hemisphere and the political style, mustachioed style of the southern hemisphere. But it comes to the same gangsterism. So it's a fun novel, and I wrote it because I was writing a desperately depressing novel at the same time, and I wanted to amuse myself. And I said, well, okay, well then, why don't I write a comic novel? They're the most difficult, supposedly, and you'll have fun. You're proving to yourself that you can do it. So I wrote The Love Queen of the Amazon, and after that, the next book that was published is a book called Fishlight. And that by that time, my agent washed her hands of me because the writing had become, quote, experimental. It was different. It was not normal. So the Fishlight is a very slight book, and it's my autobiography. But it is a work of fiction because it's my autobiography when I was 5 years old in New York City. It's full of lies, okay, as all autobiographies are. But I like it because it's in the voice of a 5-year-old. It really is. It was a delight to go back to the life of a child. And I like this. It was also a breakthrough book in the sense that I began to learn how to write into hallucination, how to really try to shed the linearity of narrative, because you're really kind of trapped with the sentences and the words that run from, well, in our language, from left to right. In other languages, from right to left. The languages that we are fighting now. Well, I'm not, but anyway. So that was Fishlight. It's called Fishlight. And one of the reasons I wrote it is to find out what the title was about, because I had this wonderful title, and I thought, Fishlight, that's going to grab people. They're going to say, what the heck is that? And so I had to find out what it was. And so I wrote Fishlight. And I found out what it is.
Which is?
Well, if you must know, when the sun goes down, and it's the gloaming, it's what you call the gloaming, and the sky is the most exquisite color. It starts at the horizon, and it's sort of yellowish, and because there's pollution now, and so it moves up, and it becomes this absolutely luminescent aquamarine, and then it bleeds into cobalt as you reach the zenith, and that's Fishlight. And I sort of justify it by saying that that's what a fish sees when it looks up through all that water at the light. So, it's an upside down world as well as a right side up world. And then the depressing novel that I was writing is called Bardo, and it's the transitional state between dying and rebirth. I feel that our planet and our world is going now through the Bardo. And that's according to Tibetan Buddhism. It's 49 days between death and rebirth in another existence. And it is about the 20th century and about all of the grief of the 20th century, where we thought it was going to be a lot better, didn't we? But in any case, so Chernobyl is there, AIDS is there, pandemics are there. But it's told as a hallucination, because I had a friend who was dying. I had a friend who was dying of AIDS. and he was a Buddhist, and he what is called an old soul. And so he was 2 months dying, and all of us, he was in the theater. He was one of our actors. I think he came after you, but he would visit what we were doing, so he saw you perform. But he was a wonderful actor, and he was a desperately honest. He had such a sense of personal integrity. And he was dying over 2 months. And during that time, he was in a coma, of course, but his eyes were completely alive. He saw visions that, he must have seen extraordinary things. So I began to understand the business of dying and how the synapses fire, all the millions of brain synapses fire, and that how it's possible to have this inner life, this experience, this hallucination. And it gave me permission, because I had learned how to write out of linearity and into hallucination with Fishlight, and I was able to extend that into Bardo. And the whole thing begins from the point of hallucination. There is no framing at all. You are just propelled into that hallucination from the beginning when you open the book. And the last one is called The Last Piece of Fiction, because now, of course, with this book, I've moved into nonfiction. But the last fiction is called Redoubt. Redoubt is a word for a fortress. We would say, yes, a fort or a pillbox. It's a line of defense. And I think that more than anything, that describes the consciousness of our present time, that we all feel beleaguered. We're all defending ourselves. We're all in a capsule. And there's a tremendous amount of fear, but at the same time, the womb is also that capsule. So in a sense, this book asks the question, show me your face before you were born. And that has always interested me, because as you can see, and your listeners can see, I was born into this planet as a female person. And I have lived my life as a female person in this culture. And whereas I think it's probably easier in this culture to live as a female person than it might be, say, in a culture like Saudi Arabia, still, we are not equal. We are not viewed as persons, nor are we given respect, nor is our consciousness appreciated as fully as it ought to be. Here's what's very interesting. The people that have built these nuclear reactors, for the most part, are male, and they're male engineers. What's very interesting about the human eye is that the peripheral vision of female people is a lot more acute than it is for male people. Male people see straight ahead. Female people have a broader canvas. And perhaps they see the bigger picture. But there's a physiological reason for that, because female rods are longer, but our cones are shorter. So in our eyes, we replicate the yieldingness of female sexuality. Whereas the male eye is just the reverse. It thrusts. So its cones are longer and they're more prominent. But its little rods are pathetic. It doesn't see at the margins. And that's why I think the female voice needs to be respected. But I wrote Bardo from the perspective of what it means to be born into this world as a person, and then to be reduced to being a female and not a female person. And it's a pain in the neck as a book. Critics tell me it's a pain in the neck because it goes around and around. But you know what? I meant it to be, because I wanted to trick my reader into imagining that the pain in the neck is a woman, is a man, because the first half of that book is totally scientific, and it goes on and on and on about things like cloud cover and the percentage of moisture in the desert air, and over again about the phenomena that take place, but quantified statistically. So it should be a pain in the neck because this is a woman, and she is in a fortress in a desert somewhere. It's not said where. And I was very honored because, of course, critics were not interested in this book. So it has been reviewed elsewhere, not in the mainstream press at all. And one critic, who I would imagine he's Mexican, so he must be very invested in a certain amount of machismo. And he said, I have never read a book that put me into the state of what it must be like to live as a woman in this world. So that's the fiction. And so this was an abrupt break for me, because with fiction, the better liar you are, the more you're going to be honored as a writer. Okay? But with journalism, it's just the opposite. The task there has to be as truthful as it is possible to be.
Well, I'd like you to stay with us for more thought-provoking ideas from Cecile about humanity and her writing experiences as an author and as a human being. So stay with us, and we'll be right back on In Their Own Words.